In terms of the your work with mergers and acquisitions and evaluating all the, let's say, I don't know, circumstances, whether or not that deal end to end is what the client really wants to go through with. Did you feel that open source introduced like a lot of added complexity compared to just the licensing and IP and all the other areas that your work was covering already?
Well, it definitely was a different thing to consider. It was a different rubric that people weren't always used to. And one of the things that I would look at would be whether or not there was some issue related to open source, perhaps an open source obligation that had not been fulfilled. Or maybe even more seriously, a cease and desist letter that existed in the data rooms that you create as part of doing an M&A due diligence. Either way, that presents a potential risk because, again, open source is based on intellectual property law and sometimes contract law theories, and both of those need to be taken seriously because they could potentially result in litigation, which is expensive for companies. Additionally, the use of trademarks associated with certain open source projects. Those aren't typically granted in open source licensing, so that could present intellectual property issues. If a particular deal was based on the value of the software that the company wanted to acquire, that they felt that was market differentiating technology that they wanted to have as part of their portfolio, but it turned out that all of that was based on open source and just available in the open, and they could just simply consume it off of GitHub or wherever, then maybe it's not worth the money that they were contemplating paying for that deal if it turns out that the software that they're trying to, or the solution stack that they're trying to get, was based on open source, and they'd need to know about that too. So some of the things that you might consider doing in an M&A cycle, one, if there's a risk presented, you might decide that the risk is negligible or that it's something that's easily remediated, that you could just deal with it after the deal has closed, and you might go forward on that set of train tracks. You might look at it and say, hey, we still want this deal, but this is really impactful, what we've discovered in the diligence due to the open source. Maybe it's not worth quite as much money, so there might be a counteroffer involved based on that issue. You might decide to nix the deal entirely because maybe there's something about the lack of compliance in a company that just seems too difficult to take on, and the company that's doing the acquisition may not want the PR or the litigation or any of the other issues that might come up with open source. And the final thing that you might try to do is acquire some closing conditions. You might say, well, this is a big issue. We don't want to deal with it ourselves, but we could make the deal contingent on the entity that we're acquiring fixing it before we close this deal. Sort of like when you buy a house. If the air conditioner is broken, you might say, fix the air conditioner and then we'll buy the house. They might ask that you fix your open source compliance issues and then the deal can go through. So those are just some of the pathways that might come up in a typical M&A. So that's where I would focus in terms of evaluating the open source issues involved with any software that was part of the acquisition.
That sounds way too complex for me, who started out as a software developer.